triggers you and you feel that it's not a safe place for you, maybe ask someone to sit with yourself or leave the session or talk to us. So if there's anything that makes you feel unsafe, then please take care of yourself. Also, if you have any questions on the content during the panel, please use the chat function below or the Q&A. If you go down, you will see that you have a Q&A function. We will use it at the end of the session after our panelists started talking and we answered all questions. Then towards the end, we will go to a Q&A and you will be able to ask our panelists all questions you want. And then we'll see how much time we have and how many questions we can answer. Yeah, so I'll start introducing our panelists today. We have a very exciting panel with different perspectives from all around the world. We have Philippe Guinant. Philippe, maybe you can say hello.
Hello, everybody.
So Philippe, hey, Philippe, he's the co-founder and CEO of Lingua TV. Andreas will post the link of Philippe's organization. And Philippe created Lingua TV, which is a digital language training platform that works for corporations, but also educational organizations, and also language training, delivers language training for private consumers. So thanks, Andreas. Andreas just posted the link of Philippe's organization in the chat if you want to check it out. So thanks, Philippe, for being here. The next person I want to introduce you is Hayat Adi. Hayat Adi is a master's student in Belgium currently, and she's a refugee from Syria. She works also for an organization called RUN. Andreas will also post the link below, and RUN is supporting women in Belgium, women refugee, for their integration. So yeah, thanks, Hayat.
Thank you for the introduction.
Next one, I hear a small echo. Oh no, it's gone. Okay. So my next panelist is Melissa Hauber-Özer, and Melissa, maybe you can say hi so everyone sees you.
Hello.
So Melissa is a PhD candidate in international education, and she has experience doing some research on the experience of Syrian refugees in Turkish higher education. So dealing with language learning in this Turkey-Syrian context. So thanks, Melissa, for being here. The next panelist I will present is Dina Pazik.
Hello.
Dina co-founded the NGO Second Tree. Second Tree is operating in the north of Greece, and they deliver trainings also and support on teaching, learning. They support refugees and asylum seekers on their learning journey. Where it's needed. So thanks, Dina, for being here. And then we have Chris Soughton.
Hello.
Hi, Chris. Chris is an education consultant in English language teaching, and he has experience working in conflict and post-conflict states and situations. So he worked in Jordan, Lebanon, Nepal, Tibet, I think, Nigeria, so many different contexts. Yeah, so thanks, Chris, for being here today. And the last panelist I want to present is Ahmad Salim. And Ahmad is joining from Amman, where he's living right now. Originally, he's from Sudan. and he's studying with an NGO called Mosaic in Jordan, and he also led classes himself and raised the rights of non-minority refugees in Jordan, which means that the majority of refugees in Jordan is from Syria, and then we have also quite some refugees from other countries, like Ahmed from Sudan, and yeah. So thanks, Ahmed, for being here. The objective of our panel today, so we'll talk about the importance of language learning for integration in a refugee context. So yeah, language has an important role in displacement, and we want to talk about how we can deploy tools and digital tools the best in an equitable and qualitative manner for marginalized and displaced groups. And we want to share some best practices from all your local perspectives. And towards the end, we also want to open maybe a list of opportunities to improve your language skills. So we'll have a small panel, and I will ask our panelists to answer some questions. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A where you can ask your questions. And we will have a session where we can all share together in a pad the best tips we have about language learning. And this will stay anonymous also at the end, so you can join on this pad anonymously. All right. Before we start, I'd like to warm up a little bit, and we prepared a small poll, which has 2 questions. So Andreas, if you would like to send the poll, please. I would like to ask you to answer 2 questions. First, about your motivation to learn a language. I'm interested to learn what was your motivation, or is currently your motivation to learn a language. Maybe you want to study, you want to get to know better someone special, to understand your song, your favorite song, integrated in a new environment, getting a job, something else. And the second question would be your personal situation. Are you a teacher? Are you a language learner? Are you working for an NGO, an organization, or for an institution? So it would be interesting to know. So we have, at the moment, I don't know if you can see the answers. Andreas, do you know if people can see the answers? Or only us? Okay, so we'll wait until the poll is ended. We have almost everyone participating here who voted. Thanks, Shana. Okay, I will share the answers to the poll in a few seconds. Right now we have 10 questions, 10 answers missing, sorry. Let's wait a few seconds more. So for now, the motivation to learn a language. So the highest rate is integrating in a new environment. Then we have studying and getting a new job and something else. If someone would like to elaborate on something else, please use the chat. And then we have to get to know a better person and to understand your favorite song as a least one, with 9%. So integrating in a new environment wins with 45%. So an exchange year, yeah, that's also a nice one. Doing your job better, yeah, that's also a nice motivation. All right. And the love of languages, yes. Immigration, citizenship, yes, definitely. All right, thanks for your answers. Yeah, understanding one's partner. All right, so the second question about your personal situation is really interesting because it helps us also directing the session today, because we wanted to know if we have more people here looking for language tips, language learning tips, or if we have more people here from organizations. And it turns out we have more people from NGOs and organizations that joined today with 56%. Then we have equally people being teachers and language learners. And we have with 9% people working for an institution. All right. Yes, so Andreas, please share the results with everyone. It's anonymous. Thanks, Jay, for your input. It's quite interesting because, yeah, navigating a system in a new country, having access to mental health, primary healthcare, that's, of course, way easier if you know the language. So now you should be able to see all answers. And yeah, I'm happy and excited that so many people are joining, and apparently many from NGOs and organizations. So, all right. If we're good now with the poll, I will move on to our questions and we'll start the discussion with our panelists. So I'll stop sharing the poll right now. Up. Okay, let's move to our first question. And as an introduction in the topic, I would like to know, why is language learning so important when it comes to a migration and refugee context? What are, in your opinion, the challenges, main challenges and opportunities you see? And to begin with, I would like to ask Melissa to give a small input about the importance of language learning in migration and refugee contexts. So Melissa, if you would like to start.
Sure. Well, I can actually attest from my own experience as an immigrant that language learning is essential for participating in the society, for making friends, for navigating healthcare, like Jay said, accessing work and further opportunities for education. For refugees specifically, especially in Turkey, there wasn't a good infrastructure for teaching Turkish as a second language for many years, and we're still working on it. So there was a huge delay, and there weren't very many teachers that had the skills for teaching a second language. Also, there was a focus on the written language rather than speaking, and kind of basic language, not really advanced and academic language. So for the participants in my current research, they struggled to develop Turkish language skills for higher education.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's interesting. Thanks. And maybe we can ask Ahmad also about why he thinks that language learning is so important when it comes to refugee migration context. Where do you see the main challenges and opportunities?
Okay, thank you. For me, it's really important, like, because I'm a refugee still, and somebody's becoming a refugee is long process, Let's say, for example, I stayed displaced in my country like more than 10 years. Then I came to Jordan. So after I came to Jordan, I became a refugee. But in terrible camp in Sudan, so it's so difficult to know that how this language as English is important for us, because in there everybody communicated in Arabic, just very easy, and the other languages, local languages. But when we came to like country like Jordan, we met with many different nationalities, refugees, and most of us are willing to resettle in third countries in Europe or so. And even now, recently, we all began to know that it's like studying English language as you are refugees. is essential, as Melissa mentioned, because we missed many years we didn't study. So like now I am almost 26. I should have finished university, but I didn't get the opportunity to study.
Yeah.
And so that is why when we know the English language, we know how to deal with the life with ourselves, how to like integrate with the locals and also with the other refugees, just through the English centers, the English institutions. These the places always like support for integration. And so it is kind of a start of the new life when come to studying English, because one day most of us will be like speaking English as a native speaker, then they will pursue their dreams, whether they want to complete their higher education or want to just get a job. It's all, if you have a language skill, it is facilitate for the all contacts in the refugees' life.
Yeah.
And
Thanks,
thank
Ahmed.
you.
Yeah, your situation gives already a lot of insights because it shows how complex the situation is, because even if you know Arabic from Sudan, in Amman, you probably need to learn the Arabic language that you use in Jordan, which is a bit different than in Sudan. And then there's a third language you need to learn with English. And so even if you integrate in Jordan right now and want to resettle to a third country, you need to learn this third language. So yeah, I think it's really interesting to see that language skill is definitely a very central point on integration. And I wanted to ask also Hayat maybe about her experience with language learning. Why do you think it's so important in a refugee context? Which challenges and which did you encounter and which opportunities?
Well, obviously for education and social integration, but for me, language learning, especially in a new country, coming as a refugee, starting from zero, it's a way to fulfill your individual potentials, professionally, you know, socially, anything that you need to really live your life for the full potential. You need to have this language because it's the communication tool. As the challenges coming also in a new country, you face this day-to-day situations, you know, emergencies, or someone mentioned like mental health, like if you feel the need to go to a psychologist, or it's really it's something that you don't consider it when thinking, okay, I'm going to learn a new language. But when you live in this country as someone coming from displacement, from a struggling country or a conflict zone, and so you will need these kind of things, and language is the way that you can achieve these needs.
Yes, thanks. As Chris was saying, maybe he wants to elaborate on this, but yeah, we talk about languages for resilience. And as we see, it has a lot to do also with this kind of motivation, because as you said, it's a day-to-day push, and it has to do with potential and resilience and survival. Maybe Chris, you want to elaborate on this languages on plural? Ah, Chris froze. Is Chris frozen on your computer as well? Okay, that's a bit of pity. Maybe he'll join again in a second and can elaborate. At the same time, maybe we can move on with our second question, and we'll come back to Chris when he joins again. Then my second question was, My second question was about good language learning. So we talked about how language learning is essential and how it can help you be confident about yourself and be able to talk about different levels of yourself, maybe in a mental health also journey and healing journey. But I was asking myself,
sorry, my connection went there.
No problem, Chris. Do you want to elaborate on the
Yes,
plural languages?
sorry. I was just saying, I think it's that conflict between the present self and the future self in terms of the languages which you need in your existing situation and then the languages which you might need in the future, whether that is English or whether that is German or Turkish or Danish or Dutch or whatever it may be. So I think that can sometimes be a challenge for many refugees in terms of the languages which they try and acquire, which is why, I mean, we may come on to talk about this later, but why English is so often the default option that people go to because of its universal nature, but actually there may be more specific languages which are more appropriate for people to learn. But as I say, it's not always known what those languages are. Yeah,
and finding also how to set priorities, which language to learn first, etc. Philip, you want to add a comment, maybe, I saw?
Yeah, I would even go a step further and would say there's no integration without language learning or language skills. It's a little bit hard to say that, but if you think about a lot of immigrants or refugees, they've never learned the language or never, let's say, learned the language in depth. They are not really getting much of the culture and how the people think and so on. And I lived myself in foreign countries, and if you don't speak the language and don't understand it, you get only part of it. And I think really it matters. Language skills matter.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for your inputs. I was going to move on to the second question before you joined again, Chris. And yeah, we talked also about how central language learning is on this healing and survival path, but what makes good language learning in refugee and migration context? What makes it possible also to build your self-confidence and being also confident about talking about difficult situations like traumas. So please, I wanted to ask Dina maybe if she could give us some input from her NGO or her experience with what makes it actually a good language learning offer in a migration context.
Sure. So we've sort of evolved, the way we began our programming and our approach to language learning in 2016, when there was absolutely nothing in the camps where we were based in northern Greece, has evolved over time and based on the needs of the population that we were working with, and also, their own needs evolved. So many people that arrived in Greece in 2016 were there temporarily. You could say that they would for sure be leaving at some point because the policy, they had arrived before the EU-Turkey agreement. So their needs differed very much from the needs of the current refugee population in Greece, which is most likely, or well, should be staying in Greece. So naturally, the way that we approach this evolved based on the political and legal sort of changes to a person's status in Europe. But I'll try and summarize it so that I don't talk, I'm not the only one talking. We place a lot of importance on quality. So like anywhere else, access to a quality program of language learning is the key thing. Refugees especially need language urgently. So offering a solid program is really our key objective. And I guess I'll share 4 key ingredients that we identified as super important in this context. So the first is actually fairness. The opportunity, it must be accessible to everyone. In our context, we're the only organization offering language classes. So that means we cater to a population of around 3,000 refugees living in camps in the urban area who have no other access to language learning opportunities for both Greek or English. And given this limited time we have to offer language classes in and the limited space, there's really high demand. And I'm sure this is common in most refugee sort of contexts. There is more demand than supply. So for us to make access to our classes fair, especially with an ever, there's always new people coming from the islands. We have really, really strict rules for our programs. And that means that we, have certain expectations of our students that might be more strict than in other contexts, because we believe that just because a person has been there longer doesn't mean they have more access to a service than someone who's just arrived. So we hold our students to really high sort of account, and we make no exceptions. The making of no exceptions can be quite uncomfortable in this context and can lead to many difficult conversations, but ultimately is the only way that we can safeguard equality of access. And this, I'm talking mainly now, this applies to all our programming, but I suppose the majority of our experience in terms of the structured approach to language learning is for adults. Because that's, again, a demographic that's really not catered for, at least not in Greece, and they're actually the people needing access to language most urgently. So the second aspect of what we consider to be a good practice for language learning is it being structured and tailored. So we do model our learning environment in some ways to formal school, to formal classes. We split our students by level, which range from A0, which is complete illiteracy, and that's split into 3 different levels. So the majority of our students may be illiterate in their own mother tongue, definitely don't know the Latin script. So that's kind of the highest, or the most in-demand level class. And then we go A1, A2, B1 in line with the Common European Framework for Language Reference. All our volunteers are qualified language teachers, and we have really high expectations of sort of the lesson planning and evaluation sides of things to make sure that, the 1 hour a student gets in that class is contributing to them actually learning something. Of course, the content is tailored to their specific needs, which are mainly to do with the third ingredient, which is the functional and relevant side of language learning. So we try to teach students what they need to communicate first and foremost. So as I said before, most people are illiterate or are at the literacy level. So learning how to be able to express themselves is more important than maybe learning, how to read or write. But of course, learning how to write their name so they can sign a form, which they have to sign all the time in this context, is the first kind of practical step. And yeah, how to communicate on topics that are relevant to their lives as refugees in Greece and in Europe. And finally, the socializing or engaging ingredient, which I guess kind of touches upon the things that were mentioned before about confidence building and the want or the desire for people to learn a language or to continue learning it. So our languages evolved, or our classes evolved over time to incorporate the above aspects that I mentioned, but these were all discovered, like I said, through our initial format, which was just having classes as socializers. So to get people out of the tent, out of their heads, and into a space where they felt like they could just come, have a chat, meet some people, and learn a word or two along the way. People really needed a distraction in the beginning. So our classes, this really formed the foundation of our approach, I would say, as an organization, to engage with people, to discuss their needs with them, and to create programs and spaces where they want to be, to get them then to come back. And of course, this doesn't mean appeasing to every demand that people had. We've had lots of disagreements. At one point, we had a partial coup where a teacher that had just arrived, CELTA trained, had all the best games in mind to teach. Really, the students were an elderly group, and they were like, no, this isn't education, this is games. And so they decided to leave. And so we had to have a conversation to explain, look, guys, trust us, this is language learning, it's just done through a different way. And through these sort of conversations and this feedback and these reactions, we managed to sort of create a space where people feel comfortable to come, where they want to learn, where a big part of it is just making friends and having a chat, but with the possibility to learn and prepare actually for a language exam, which is how our programming sort of like levels up.
Okay, thanks, Dina. That's a very detailed question, and we learned a lot about what makes good language learning. I found it very interesting also to reflect on this time. I mean, there are people like in Greece that stay temporarily and people that will stay for a longer term, and to reflect on this time component, learning for a long time or learning, yeah.
Yeah, and even the choice of language, like, sorry to jump in, but like it's a really important thing, because in our context, like here, a lot of this is in reference to both English and Greek, but the learning of English as a language is seen as a sort of opportunity for people to leave. So it's like a freedom of movement tool, because nobody wants to stay in Greece. Yeah. And learning Greek is sort of accepting that you're staying there, which it's like a psychological sort of also component that we find that we've had to deal with and sort of overcome. And I don't know, it's difficult for refugees in Greece to take peace with staying there, that's for sure. Yeah.
But yeah, we heard that, yeah, making good language learning offers would, so in order to make them, it would be important to work on fairness, on the structure, on a tangible content, and on a socialization component in its program. Chris or Philip, is there one of you that want to jump in and talk also about what makes good language learning offers, or good language learning in general?
Yeah, if I could just follow up one of the points Dina mentioned, is that people really need to understand why they're learning a particular language, what the reasons for that, because that is then a more motivating factor for doing it successfully. And I think absolutely there needs to be much more of a focus on the practical and functional aspects of learning a language. Why people are doing it within the particular context, as Dina was mentioning. The challenge that educators have, though, is that most of the materials which are produced or which people have access to don't follow that kind of script. Most of the materials are grammar focused, they are writing focused, they are not directed to a more communicative, needs-based existence within that particular community, and that's the challenge people have, teachers have in that situation. And so the response is either to just use the materials as they are, which is frustrating for them and frustrating for their students, to try and adapt those materials, but often teachers are volunteers, or they don't necessarily have the skills or the ability to do that successfully, or they go online and they find stuff, but you type in English language materials, you obviously get 100 million hits coming back, and you don't know what is good quality material and what is not good quality material. So I think those are some of the challenges which educators face in that situation. So I think what we need to be as a community is more collaborative, to share good materials that work, that we know work. Often, though, there isn't this collaboration because lots of smaller NGOs are in competition with each other to secure funding. They have existential threats every day to functioning. So in a sad way, the community is not set up necessarily to share and collaborate in those kind of ways. I think an interesting approach, which perhaps I would want to encourage, and perhaps Ahmed can talk a little bit more, because his organization in Jordan, Mosaic, do this, is to follow a more dialogic form of learning, where the learners are centrally responsible for identifying what they study and how they study, so that they are given a more prominent role, and then they're able to identify the kind of language, the kind of situations which they're in, and then the teacher can act more as a facilitator to work with them on giving them the kind of language that they need in those situations, rather than coming in with an idea of the kind of language which people need to learn. Work more directly with the students in order to identify that.
Yeah, so having a student-centered perspective seems to be really, really important, and including the students directly from the beginning also in their learning pathway, so students can also learn from the beginning what their motivation is. So linking the motivation, why am I learning this, to also maybe creating a program?
Yeah, I mean, I would go even further than to say student-centered. Is really student-engaged and managed and owned, because you know most English language teaching is student-centered, but I think we need to go even further than that to push that even further.
Yeah, manage. That's really interesting. Also about the tangible part, because being like making a tangible content accessible, so focusing on everyday vocabulary, but at the same time we know that refugees are also confronted with administrative words and vocabulary, maybe law, juridical vocabulary that is very complicated, and that's also definitely a challenge when it comes to creating good learning material, because we navigate between different levels. Yeah, so I see this kind of challenge also. And also your point on community and concurrence. Maybe Philip, you have something to add onto this, because you also work with several language learning providers, being corporations or organizations or private learners.
Yeah, I have too many to add here at the point. I have to restrict my thoughts a little bit. There are so many points that you can list here in terms of answering this question, but I would mention at least two, which is access and competences. The first is already mentioned. We realized it starting 2015, when many refugees came, more than we had basically German teachers in Germany. My experiences are mainly based on teaching German and learning German. And we know a lot of refugees. We employed refugees in our company, Lingua TV, language learning provider. And many of them had waiting lists, waiting periods for a German course more than 10 or 12 months, which is for them not understandable. They come to their country of hope, a highly industrialized country, whatever their original country was, but they don't understand how do I have to wait for a language course? I mean, how can that happen? Because most of them were analog, were like presence training, and there were no teachers. So we tried to help with digital learning, which is first of all available, and then it's accessible, and then it's scalable. And it really doesn't matter if you have 1,000, 10,000 or 1 million refugees or learners or whatever origin, and they can start learning. And so we had, in terms of cooperation, we had a lot of discussions with governmental agencies and of course traditional language schools and providers. And back then it was really, they were really hesitant to apply that. The answer was sometimes you can't learn a language online or digital, that's impossible. Nowadays, 2020, we're much more experienced. We have a lot of statistics. I can share them at a later point, perhaps, how refugees learn online, or especially with their mobile app. If you look back, most of them were young. Most of them were male. Most of them were IT, PC, social media literate. So I'm not against books, and I'm not against analog learning, but the digital way of learning was the solution back then, and it's even getting better and better nowadays. So that's my first comment on access to language courses, to language learning. And I agree with Chris that cooperation could solve a lot of problems in terms of resources, and in terms of efficiency, and in terms of getting those courses and those language materials out to the target group. My second comment is more in regards to competencies. I think most of you can confirm that language learning is difficult, and it's a long-term process. And most refugees are highly motivated, highly dedicated. At least to my experience, we work with Kiron, for example, and we know the statistics, how much hours, how much time they put into language learning and how dedicated they are. But of course, language learning consists of several competencies. And so speaking is the easiest one. I know myself personally, a lot of refugees, and they can speak within months, they can speak fast. I mean, the refugees from the Arabic countries that speak Arabic fast, they speak German faster than every nation, native German native. Yeah, they speak fast. But when it comes to writing and grammar and spelling and so on, there are a lot of mistakes, a lot of lack. And so what I want to propose here to anybody who's learning a language or learning German, that you consider all competencies, because wherever you go, if it's studying at a university or if it's working, you need all competencies. At the end, you need written German or written English or any written language skills and so on. And of course, you can basically start with the easiest one, and speaking and communication is important. It's very important to communicate, but the other skills are important as well. So if you look at good language learning, to answer your questions, you need to find a program that is not only a vocabulary trainer where you build up your vocabulary. It has to be a program that covers everything from listening comprehension, grammar, speaking and writing and so on, and grammar. And so I think this is at least only 2 points that I would like to stress here.
Okay, thanks. That's really interesting. Also, what you mentioned about young men, IT, digital, like the relationship between digital offers and IT. IT. I mean, people that have already some background and knowledge and are literate would be able to access digital learning more easily. On the other hand, you see sometimes that digital literacy is lacking. I know also that RAN gave some digital literacy programs and courses to women in Belgium. Hayat, do you want to say a bit about this?
Yeah, we wanted to go into this path. We started, but you know, we couldn't have this common material because we have different age gaps, we have different backgrounds, so we have different levels. Actually, there are people who know a little bit, there are people who know much more, and there are people who are really illiterate. So we kind of faced this challenge, and we have limited resources. It's an initiative that's basically me and a friend we are doing. So we want to have a better structure, and we are working on having a better digital, material that covers more than one level, if we can say.
Yeah. Okay, I see. Thanks. Maybe we'll move on to our last question, because we're slightly over time, before we can move to Q&A, because I see that we have also some questions in the chat and in the Q&A function, and I would not like to let them unanswered. But yeah, so for my last question, I would like to ask you, are there any specific tools, materials, formats you recommend to help develop language skills? And we talked about the need of collaborative material and sharing resources, good resources, not being in concurrence. We know, or you maybe know, that there are also open educational resources that are licensed to be used by everyone. Like, yeah, are there any specific tools, formats that you recommend to develop language skills? Maybe Ahmad, do you have some insights on this?
Yeah, sure. So, just, yeah, because, like, we're already using some great tools, which is like, we are taking the training from the British Council, and it is really useful. So the teaching training from the teachers are from the community, which is the refugees community. And so it is very easy, like when you choose the language teachers from the refugees communities, especially for the lower levels. It is like more easy for them to understand, because we understand the both languages, let's say Arabic and English together, in order to interpret to them in their local language to understand. And also, so the way we are now taking training is very effective. And so like we are taking different kind of training, like
We're taking trainings from external organization like British Council.
Yeah, British Council also. Yeah, with a very professional coach.
Yeah.
Maria, yeah, she's with us here tonight.
Okay.
Participating with us. I'm glad to hear. So it is like kind of the tool that help the language skill is kind of the trainings.
Yeah.
So we don't want to like study the traditional teaching no more. So like we are using the learners as a resource, is kind of using the learner as a resource. Like also we are like teaching the emergent language, which is like refugees want to learn something about themselves, something like relevant for them. Instead of we used to study like the books, even something we don't know the background. But when you come to study something relevant to you, or just you want to know about it, it will more encourage you to keep studying, to coming to the center, whether in online or to the center, like do more research about that. And yeah, another one thing I would like to mention it, like the developing the language skills also. Yeah, like having more like centers, English centers that are leading by the communities, refugees communities. Otherwise, we have already here like several NGOs that are working with the refugees. Also, the refugees themselves are the leading the NGOs. They are volunteering for teachings and for the other programs. They are doing very well. When other refugees, they see their brothers and sisters working with NGOs and helping others, it's kind of biggest inspirations to let them awake, to let them motivate them to just keep learning in order to reach the point of the other refugees like teachers, volunteers. That is what I would like to mention.
Okay. I know Chris wants to mention something, and after I'd like to add to ask Melissa shortly of her experience from Syrian refugee in Turkey. So Chris, go on.
Yeah, just to follow on from what Ahmad was saying, really, I think it's important that we don't forget the social aspect of learning language. I totally agree that online learning and so on can be a huge benefit for so many people. But in the research and the work I've done, in particularly in Jordan and Lebanon, the social aspect of learning a language is huge. And also, I think there's a risk of creating a negative mindset towards learning. For example, in a lot of places in Jordan and in Lebanon where online learning may be available, but people can't access it because of their hardware issues or data issues or whatever it may be, and can actually create a negative attitude towards learning if they can't get involved in that. But what a language learning community, as Ahmed was talking about, always has is each other. And they can rely on each other, they can develop their speaking skills with each other, they can create that identity where they can acquire the language, especially if they've got a common motivation for doing that. So I completely support sort of developing online tools and so on to help language learning, but I think it starts with a good community of practice and a shared understanding of why people are learning that particular language.
Yeah, so the peer-to-peer learning and motivation. Okay, Melissa, maybe you want to add one last comment, and then we'll move on to some questions from the audience.
So what I've found, I mean, in my own experience and from the Syrian refugees that I've been conducting research with here, is that they've actually used kind of non-formal web-based tools to develop their language to make up for the deficiencies in our Turkish language courses. So like I said, there's not a lot of speaking in the Turkish language courses, and there's not a lot of kind of daily language, so to speak. So they've actually, several of my participants have mentioned watching Turkish television shows to kind of get that conversational language, or music, radio, and those kinds of things, which I've used as well for the same reasons. And then for academic language, which was the other deficiency I mentioned, they've used like Google Translate to translate textbooks so that they could understand in the early days. So they've really looked for alternative resources instead of kind of structured language courses or apps.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's great. Yeah, I like these alternative tips. That's what also we want to share in our document at the end when we will gather all the tips. So please stay until the end, because we have a collaborative tips sharing session. And yeah, YouTube, for example, we'll write it in the doc after. And Philip, you want to add one short last comment?
Yes, very short. I didn't want to propose that digital learning is the non plus ultra. I just wanted to make a case that instead of waiting 12 months, it's a good alternative. But we've done several studies on blended learning, and that's probably a new keyword here, where you can improve the learning results by many factors, by many percentages, while you add to the presence training an online component. For example, literature is full of studies where basically the results are good. I agree with you that the access to the digital learning must be secured. But I have another case study, for example. We have a lot of, let's say, they're not only refugees, but people who want to come to Germany for learning, for working. And it wouldn't make sense to have them here as a total beginner and learn in German in A1, A2, or even B1 levels, where the cost of living in Germany is so high, and the lessons are expensive. So they stay in their home country. And make an example. Nurses and doctors, for example, that are highly required in Germany or Western Europe, all over the world, and they basically learn and study at home with online tools, the app, offline, online, YouTube. I mean, there are so many resources. I don't want to mention them here. And then they have to pass an exam for the work permit. And so they save at least a year studying dedicated the language, whether it's German or English, and then they pass the exam, and then they know they have the language. They look, of course, for an employer, and then they come to the country. And so they save a lot of time, and I think a lot of cost. And I think that's a different case than refugees who have to flee their country and are suddenly in another country. Totally, but I just wanted to mention it.
Great. Maybe you want to say quickly in 2 words what blended learning is? I can explain it also with...
Blended learning is basically the concept of mixing different learning formats and perhaps learning content. Let's say even, I would make it a very broad definition, even a teacher and a book is already blended, because you have the teacher who teaches you, who you go to class, and then you have the book that can be used in class, but also outside of class for self-studying. This is my interpretation to enclose everybody who's like still in the age of analog and printing. But of course, blended learning means like meshing up the resources of a teacher and the resources that are available anywhere. It could be dedicated programs like Lingua TV with videos and exercises and tests, but it could be also just YouTube or whatever, a movie with subtitles and so on. So blended learning means take advantage And that, I think that must be the objective, taking advantage of many different resources, contents, even different methodologies to make a win-win situation, you know. So if the teacher is not available after 6 p.m. because, you know, why stop learning? Take the app, take the internet, take YouTube, and continue learning. So that's blended learning. And of course, if you have then a concept and some basis that for example, our philosophy is to really intertwine both, that the teacher has access to the learning results and sees what's happening, the learning progress, then he can adapt his teaching again. Because why would you as a teacher teach something that the learner already knows? And if he's proven, let's say in an online resource with exercises and collecting points or gamification, that he knows the subject, why bore him with something he knows already? So there are a lot of aspects, I don't want to get into detail too much, that blended learning makes it much more favorable.
Yeah, we're running a bit out of time, but yeah, so blended learning is great when it comes to going towards more digital online learning, but keeping also the offline parts, and yeah, mixing several contents and mediums and so on. So theoretically we're a bit out of time, but if you want to stay for a few questions we can answer, and Andreas, maybe you could share the link of the pad already in the chat so we can all move to the pad if we have some useful tips we want to share, create a community of resources. I also added my first tip at the start so we can all see, like for example Duolingo, which is a free learning app. You can have the premium version, but there's a free one. I mean, you mentioned also YouTube, watching TV shows, Google Translate, etc. There are plenty of resources, so maybe we can all collect our best tips. And for the people who shared in the chat earlier that they created a startup, I don't remember exactly where, but please also share it in the doc so everyone can check it out. Okay, and while everyone is moving towards the pad, maybe we can pick up some questions. In the Q&A, we had a question from Aus Al-Hamid, directed at Philip. So Philip, do you agree that studying German online before coming to Germany, for example, reduces the time waiting in Germany then?
Yes, I think I already answered this question earlier. Yes,
yeah, I think that's,
definitely yes.
Elodie was asking, thanks for the offer. I would like to know how to get that, but I didn't know which offer you were referring to. So if you want to, yeah, if you want to mention it again in the chat, please do it. And she's also saying, I have practiced those tips, TV shows, reading, socializing, but still have difficulty pronouncing some words. And I'm now feeling confused. What can I do? So before I ask one of the panelists, I know that there are also some specific pronunciation courses from Coursera, for example, for English, but maybe someone else has some tips for difficulty to pronounce some words. I mean, what could help there?
I mean, what I would just say on pronunciation, because it's something I've heard a lot in my research and my work, but my honest view is that people get too worried about pronunciation. You know, the goal of language learning is to be able to be understood and to understand, you know, what other people have said. And I think too often people worry about, how do I sound? Do I sound, or should I learn British English or American English or whatever it may be? And communicative competence should be the goal, in my view. So of course you want to be clear and understood, but my honest view would be there are other things which the limited amount of time that people have to acquire language they could be focusing on, rather than worrying too much about pronunciation.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Louisa agrees with you. We have also one question. given the current pandemic, so with Corona and the long waiting list for language courses, as you mentioned, online learning is becoming more and more prevalent, could be a good way of providing greater access to language learning. So what are the main benefits and the problems with teaching online? I think we mentioned a bit some answers to this question already, but if you have another answer for online learning. Dina, are you using online learning in your NGO, for example?
Well, not really, and mainly because of infrastructural reasons. So there's no internet basically, and we have like everything that people have said we've faced in some way, like trying to encourage students to do self-study, but then if they don't have internet, they have to go to a cafe. When they go to a cafe, they don't feel comfortable because they feel unwelcome and they're being stared at. If they do it at home, it's crowded. There's like 9 people living in a container. It's not really a space for studying. So I was just writing up like what we did to try and tackle this, which was basically touching upon what Chris was also saying, creating like a socializing activity where we kind of hit 2 birds with 1 stone. We found cafes around Yanina where we work that are refugee friendly, and where people could go and sort of just be like, have a coffee, have a chat, and through that we would just, we would play a game, or we would have a conversation and just build people's confidence in using the language in like a informal setting, and also through that access to the internet. So it was kind of like, they were able to both access internet to learn, Duolingo, all the apps that are probably going to be mentioned here, but also have the confidence to use the language in a public space, which also led to better integration, because we saw, like, literally you wouldn't even believe how quickly it happens that a student who doesn't even speak English saw 2 Greeks playing chess and just went up to them and was like, oh, I challenge you to a game. And it's as easy as that, just being in a space where you can access other people, and agency immediately, like a person's agency immediately kind of gets, the obstacles to it get removed. So I think like we would love to be able to access more internet based learning opportunities, because like Philip said, it would increase access exponentially. And we tested it with Zoom during the lockdown and it's worked, but it's still a work in progress.
Yeah. So as you say, and as we just got a question also from Jay Karuna Nunhi, sorry if I pronounce it falsely, but yeah, it comes also, as Ahmed said earlier, and Dina, it comes to study centers, it comes also to access to internet, and yeah, having access to devices and so on. So online learning comes also sometimes with a price, and negotiating with internet providers or making content available offline, downloadable. That's also the kind of challenges we work on at Kiron, trying to solve these problems. Yes, so I'm reading some Q&A questions. And following on from Dina, yes, Chris was adding in the UK about knitting circle, so women knitting clothes and talking and learning language at the same time. So yeah, again, mixing one activity with the other one, making language learning fun, is one of the methods. I'm seeing also on the pad that it's quite active and people are adding their tips. Please, everyone, if you have some tips, resources, and are looking for some resources, join us on the pad. Find a tandem, for example. I see Chris, no, or somebody else mentioned the tandem partner. So it's something that is quite common in Germany, where you tandem with one person and partner with someone that want to learn your language, and then you exchange. Thanks, Andreas, for posting the link. Are there any other questions from the Q&A that any panelists want to answer, or something else you want to add before we finish with the pad
Charlotte, I'll just mention that I see this is for mainly targeted, I think, for students, but we've over the years created like a similar type of document, a Padlet, where we've collected resources that we've tried and tested in our context. So I'm happy to share that. I can add that here, and then for anyone who does teach or works in this area, feel free to have a look at it. I mean, it's quite, there's a lot of stuff there, so you know, some will be relevant for you, some won't, so I'll put that down there as well, just so people know.
Also in the document I see some resources already about teaching, so teaching resources not only for students and learners. So yeah, if you're willing to share it, please do on the doc. I think everyone will be happy to see the resources. Someone else want to add a closing comment or answering a question?
If I may, I just want to say we support teachers also with teaching material to create blending, to realize, to implement blended learning. So if there are any teachers or so, please contact me, or institutions or also. And by the way, we also support refugees in learning languages. So whenever somebody is interested in learning languages, German or English or whatever we offer there, French, Spanish, Italian, please contact me or contact us through the website.
On Lingua TV, yes. Okay, we have some questions about joining Kiron. For this, the best is to go to camp or to register on Kiron. Maybe Andreas can share the link. And are there organized local community refugees exchange programs to integrate refugees? Yes, there are many. I would advise you go maybe to the next one, to the next city where you live in, because that's where they can maybe link you to local contacts. But there are many NGOs in Germany working on this. Yes, thanks, Philip. Okay, I think we're 10 minutes out of time. So if anyone else has a last question, we could try to answer it in the chat. Otherwise, I will quickly say thank you to all panelists that joined today. It was a bit short. I had the feeling we could talk about this for 1 hour longer, and I'm sure many of the attendees would have other questions and would have benefited from your insights. Yeah, it's a bit sad that we didn't get to talk a bit longer, but I was very happy to have you all here and to get your insights. We got a lot of insights on motivation, on student-owned content, which I loved the concept, because we always talk about student-centered, as Chris was saying, but yeah, student-owned, managed. We talked about access to competencies, to tangible content, to the principles that Dina mentioned with fairness and structured, tailored levels and so on. So we had a very fruitful exchange. Thanks, Chris, for sharing your email address. If from the attendees, if someone was raising their hand, maybe Bright, we can allow quickly Bright to talk. I will allow it, yes, right now.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Someone was raising their hand from the attendees.
Yeah. So yeah, I was, my name is Bright, sorry. I sent a message to the chat. Can you please just try to read it so that you know what I'm trying to ask? Thank you very much.
About Kiron, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I'll share the link where you can register for Kiron. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
I'll mute you again. Okay. Yeah, I'm reading Jay's comment. She's saying, in the context of Syria, Greece, Melissa and Dina may have inputs on limited resources for online learning. Melissa, do you want to comment on limited resources for online learning, or?
This is a concern among the university students that I know best from the population. Many of them do have smartphones and internet access, although it's of course an expense that others can't necessarily afford. So the ones who are in university generally have more resources of some kind than others. So there's definitely not equal access to online resources and not equal digital skills among a lot of people, like adults with limited education and things.
Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot for this last comment. I'll share the link of Kiron here because to everyone here because you asked where to apply. And I will need to close the meeting now because we have many other meetings today in the Amplify Now conference. If you're still interested in other topics, please join us on social media or on the conference website, Amplify Now, Virtual Refugee Conference, VRC. And yeah, if you want to contact us about this session, you can contact us on the website of the conference. So don't hesitate to. And yeah, maybe see you in another session today. Thanks everyone for joining and for participating. Have a great rest of the day also.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Bye bye.
Thanks, Charlotte.
Bye-bye.